Welcome to another episode of Shadows of the Tarot. Eddie was investigating the suspicious death of a man who had died by electrocution. Ty had always been a hard worker and strived to be the best at the job he had found. He started working in the mines as a young adult. He had a troubled childhood and had gotten involved in gangs. Initially, he found it hard to leave the gang life. His mother had died when he was very young. He was only 15 at the time, and Ty felt very uncomfortable living in the house where she had once lived, so he went to live with one of his friends and her family. Her mother had tried her best to get him to change his ways. When he first arrived, he was an angry boy involved in street gangs. He even moved in with a machete and knuckle dusters that he would hide under his bed. The mother later found out that his father had been making the knuckle dusters. Therefore, she couldn't expect his father to help him escape the gang danger he was in. She eventually got through to him after months of discussions. Eventually, he told the gang that he no longer wanted anything to do with them, but gangs are not that easy to get out of once you're in them. They found where he was living, and the Hoons were out the front in their cars doing burnouts, beeping their horns and harassing the neighborhood. They shouted out from the hot-tub vehicles that they would return to deal with him. Some disappeared for a little while, but others kept cruising the street. They returned later that night armed with baseball bats. Ty didn't know what to do, but he had an uncle in a bikie gang he could call. His uncle arrived within the hour in a little red Mini, came into the house and made a few phone calls. Not long after the phone calls, the gang of youths disappeared. Ty asked his uncle how he managed to get them to leave. His uncle replied that he wouldn't be bothered by these thugs anymore. Ty told his uncle that he thought the bikers would have dealt with the situation with guns or weapons on motorcycles. His uncle just laughed. "They're just kids." I made a few calls, found the ringleader, reached out to his parents and told them what they were up to. They said they would deal with them when they got home. I don't bring my bike and the whole gang just for a few little upstarts. A few years passed, and Ty had left the gang life behind him. When he saw a job vacancy in the mines, he applied for it. He started his working career with basic tasks and eventually got promoted to core driller. He worked 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. They were a close-knit family at the mines. He joined a lotto syndicate, and they played the same numbers every time. Ty had always been intrigued by tarot and divination, so when he saw Elise's ad on social media, he made an appointment to see her. He sat down and had his reading. Elise read his past, present, and future. Elise looked a bit stumped when she read the future card. Ty knew a bit about tarot and thought she had changed the interpretation of his future into one that would sound more appealing to him. But he didn't tell her. He just said that it didn't make sense to him. Elise took out the antique tin of tarot, and Ty chose a card. Elise said it would add some clarity to his reading. The card Ty selected was the Wheel of Fortune. Wow, that's a good card. It signals that things are about to change. The advantages you reap during this time may last a lifetime. It's an opportunity to start over and flourish again. Acknowledge changes and go with the flow of events. It represents good fortune, wealth, and financial stability. Like many other clients, Ty took a picture of the card with his phone. A few weeks later, back at the mines, the workers were sitting down to watch the lotto draw. It was the one thing they didn't miss. They were all hopeful for a better life. They couldn't believe it when Terry told them that all their numbers had been called. Their minds reeled. They couldn't believe their luck. They already started to work out how much it had to be divided by and how much money they would receive. It was quite a large sum, enough to set them up for life. A few years before working in the mines, Ty had met a girl called Chantel. They met at a party, and she would always wait at home for his return from work. Chantel had always been a needy person. She would always argue with him to find a job closer to home so he wouldn't have to go away to work all the time. This time, when he arrived home, he arrived with an engagement ring. He explained that he had come into some luck at the mines. He didn't want to tell her about the lotto win. He just said he had a promotion at work. But he did tell her they could arrange to get married, which they did. They didn't have a huge wedding. They got married in a nice park with a celebrant. It took months for the final payment from Lotto to come through. He was still trying to wrap his head around it. He was still thinking something might go wrong with the prize money, and that's why he hadn't told Chantel yet. As soon as the winnings came through, he informed Chantel. She asked him exactly how much money he had won, and he told her a figure, but it wasn't exactly true. For some reason, he didn't want her to know exactly how much, but she realized changes, bills paid and up to date, a new car, and Ty had been talking about giving up work in the mines and buying a little cafe by the river. Chantel had never worked, not a day in her life, and she wasn't keen on running a cafe. Working every day wouldn't suit her. But to have a lot of money, that would be a thing. Her mind had become focused on how she could get rid of Ty and end up with the money. She knew he had lied about the amount of winnings. She knew he was too big to overcome in a fight and not a car accident. She might get hurt in that, or he would be injured, and she would need to look after him for life. If she tried to stab him, he could grab the knife and grab her. Every day her mind focused on how to get rid of her husband. Then Chantel hatched her plan. Ty took her to look at a cafe by the river. It was all very nice, but not for her. When she tried to explain to Ty that she didn't think she could manage a cafe, he just gave her more assurances, telling her that she would succeed as long as she had confidence in her abilities and that it would be a profitable venture for them. Chantel knew she had to create her plan before Ty signed any paperwork. So when he came home, Chantel told him he should relax. She had run a bath with bubbles and oils and told Ty she would massage him after the bath. Chantel had prepared for this. Just before running the bath, she had taken her hairdryer out to dry her hair. Instead of putting it back in the cupboard like she normally would, she left it next to the sink right next to the bath. While he had been away, she had practiced this scenario many times and had ensured the cord would reach the bathtub. She got him to hop in the bath, started to bathe him, and got him relaxed till he closed his eyes. Flashes of how nice their lives had been flashed across her mind. But now there was no other way. She reached for the hairdryer, turned it on, and quickly threw it into the tub. All Ty had time to say was, "What the fuck?" He didn't even have time to grab the hairdryer to get it out. He died instantly. Chantel waited a few moments, turned the switch off at the wall, and unplugged the hairdryer, then checked for a pulse to ensure he was dead. She then phoned for an ambulance, but it was already too late when it came. This was the case that had been assigned to Eddie. He went to speak to Chantel. Her statement would read that she didn't know how it had happened. She went to make a cup of tea and the power wasn't working. She had gone up to tell Ty about the power when she found him dead with the hairdryer in the bath. Eddie asked what she thought might have happened. She said it was obvious. He must have been standing in the bathtub drying his hair and dropping the hairdryer, but this made no sense to Eddie. Why would anyone stand up to dry their hair in the bathtub before drying their body? Surely, they would get out of the bathtub, dry their bodies, and then dry their hair. There were too many loose ends. Her story didn't seem to add up, but Chantel assured him she didn't know what had happened. She was speculating. Eddie's investigation revealed that Ty had come into money 6 months prior, yet it was clear that Chantel didn't quite comprehend the precise amount at stake when he asked her. Eddie saw the familiar image of the tarot card. He felt uneasy. This time, it was the Wheel of Fortune on Ty's Facebook page. Eddie was able to pursue the lead. However, one of his colleagues thought he was crazy for believing the card had anything to do with the case. Eddie explained that he had seen the same cards in other cases, but couldn't connect them. He followed the messages and found out how to contact the tarot reader, so he made an appointment to see her. Eddie didn't know what to expect when he knocked on Elisa's door. Was she going to be some decrepit gypsy passing out these cards that he was sure now must have some link to the murders? But wait, weren't they just accidental deaths with no link to cards? So why was he even here? Why was he so curious about these random cards? Couldn't it just be a coincidence? But he had an unsettling feeling it was something more than that, so he knocked on the door and Elise answered. To his surprise, she wasn't a wrinkled old gypsy after all, but quite a beautiful woman. Eddie didn't know what to say at first when she answered the door, but then he went on to say that he was investigating the death of Ty. He explained how Ty had died and that they had found an image of one of the tarot cards on his social media. Elise seemed very surprised to hear about his death. Eddie told Elise that there had been several unusual deaths and that her cards had been seen on their phones or social media accounts. He asked if they were a popular set of cards. Elise explained that they were antique cards, and to her knowledge, there were no other cards like that in Australia. She questioned him as to how these people had died and how it could be linked to tarot readings. He explained that he wasn't sure. She was shocked, as this was the first time anyone had brought up any links to deaths and her deck of cards. How could it have anything to do with the cards when they were mostly accidental deaths? The detective asked when she had last seen Ty, and she told him, adding that she couldn't shed any light on the accident that had happened. Elise asked the detective if he would like to see the deck of cards, but he declined. He was a little superstitious, and the number of deaths linked to this deck of cards he thought was abnormal, so he left. Shocked by what she had heard, Elise began looking into it as well. Many clients had Facebook pages showing images of the cards. That's the funny thing about Facebook. If you die, your profile remains. It's as if you live in the Facebook world. She was shocked to see the juggler and many others who had sought readings had passed away. There were literally over 20 of them. She couldn't believe it. Should she stop reading over some ridiculous notion that the cards had a curse on them or something? No, that's ridiculous. And her business was doing so well. It was just a coincidence. She wished the detective had never come. She wished she never knew, but even as ridiculous as it seemed, she had an unnerving feeling that somehow the cards were linked to these deaths. She didn't know how or why. Was she the hand that dealt evil? Surely not. It was just coincidence, that's all it was. Her mind could be satisfied with that. The detective had exhausted all avenues of research. There wasn't anything that could lead the cards to the death of Ty. Chantel had been very clever. Before the ambulance arrived, she had managed to prop Ty half up in the bath, then let him go so he would hit his head and back on the way down, making it look like an accident. So even though there was the motive of the winning money, the detective couldn't find any way to link her to Ty's death. Of course, her fingerprints had been on the hairdryer because they lived together. There was every chance Chantel used the hairdryer, and she said she removed it from the bath. There were marks on the body that looked like he had fallen when he was shocked, so even though Eddie was very suspicious of Chantel, there wasn't enough substantial evidence to link her to the electrocution. Eddie had to file it as if it had been death by misadventure. Yet another accidental death and another mysterious tarot card. Remember to like, subscribe, and share to others, so you don't miss an episode.